Hey, welcome back to week 3 of our series where we're really digging into the book of Acts. And listen, I think it's important that we go through God's word together, because what happens in God's word is God's spirit moves in us, right? It's sharper than a two-edged sword. It's living and active. And what happens when we go through a book line by line is it really helps us see God's word in its context. Because here's the danger. If we read the Bible one verse at a time, you can pluck a verse out and make it mean whatever you want, right? And so as we read God's word in its entirety, it kind of helps us see everything that's going on in the pages of God's word to his people. And we gain this really rich understanding of what God means when he says, fill in the blank. And so this week, we're looking at community. And you hear us talk about community a lot at Maryland. And the reason is because of what you see in the book of Acts here. It says that as God's people lived in community, as they had all things in common, their faith exploded, right? Their joy was increased. The number of people that came to Christ went up. The peace that they had was deep. They had no need because everyone shared everything. Now here's where this can be challenging. A lot of what you read in this passage flies in the face of what we want community in our faith to be about, right? Because here's what happens. In community, nobody got rich. Well, how do we know that? Well, they shared everything with each other. In community, nobody shot up the corporate ladder. In community, nobody had life coaching that helped them live their best life now. Because at the end of the day, that wasn't the purpose of community. What you see happen in community is people were cared for. And so what we have to remember about our faith is not to advance the American ideal of a successful life. Our faith is ultimately about deepening our love for God and deepening our love for one another. And so what happens when we love one another is we sacrifice for one another. We bear with one another in burdens. We're subject to one another and put the needs of the people around us before our own. And listen, that's hard, because to do that, we have to kill our selfishness. We have to kill our desire to put ourselves first. We have to kill our desire for stuff or for status, because at the end of the day, when we model the life that Christ lived, what we do is we put other people before us. But we can't do that when we're not in proximity with each other, right? So here's the most dangerous thing that you could do with your faith. Show up at church on a Sunday, get a feeling from the music and the sermon, go home and do nothing else. Because what happens when you do that is you rob yourself of this critical piece of your faith, that God's joined you with a church so that you can live in community with people. Here's what happens when we live in community. Listen, we have the opportunity to love people. People have the opportunity to love us. I guarantee you, I don't know who you are. I might know you, but like as you're listening to this, I don't necessarily know, right? Do you get the meta fourth wall that I just broke there? Okay. So I don't know maybe where you're at, but I know that you have a need. It might be different than my needs. It might be different than Telly's needs, as he's behind the camera on Twitter right now. Thanks, man. And so you have a need though. How is your need going to be met? Well, listen, God's put people around you to help you meet that need. Maybe your need is you're lonely. Maybe you have a financial need, maybe you have a medical need, maybe you have a need and that you need somebody to help you understand what it looks like to follow Christ. I don't know what your need is, but the good news of the gospel is that God has given you new life in himself. And in uniting him to you, he's also united you to your other believers. And so for a lot of us, man, we need to get into community and actually live in community, because we haven't done that yet. The next step of our faith, the next step isn't necessarily to go find our one. It's to engage the one that God's already put in our life. And so my question for you is, what kind of community do you live in right now? Right? Is it just you and God and everybody leave me alone? Or are you living in a way that you're putting the needs of the people around you above your own?